Hello everyone and welcome to Module 2, the Theoretical Foundations for Effective Sport Promotion. Now this module, what we're going to be talking about is identifying the elements of communication, recognizing integrated marketing machine and how it works in sports, and then get you to lastly understand the significance and the importance of sports branding and how it's slightly different than your traditional marketing and branding for basic business-to-business or business-to-consumer brands. So one thing you'll notice with sports communication and sports promotion, really the theoretical foundations aren't much different than any other type of marketing or communication theory. You go through this 4 steps. It's pretty common, starting with the source, developing a message, picking a medium of where to communicate this message, and then looking at the receiver. What makes sports slightly different or unique is the way we engage again with that receiver, which is the highly identified fan. So you'll notice as we talk about this, we're going to be building off what we learned in Module 1 about the characteristics and importance of understanding the highly identified fan. First off, let's look at their source. When we're talking about the source, there's 3 things that you need to consider. And if you find yourself working for an organization that's working within sports, I want you to ask yourself or sort of do an audit on these 3 things. The source power, the source attractiveness, and the source credibility. Now sports presents a very unique opportunity, and it's going to be slightly different because as you know there's a lot more emotions attached to a sports brand than there is something like Dove or Miller Lite or just your basic consumer good. Looking at these a little more closely, let's take our source power. Obviously by this we mean who has the power to create the message. Obviously, in business world, we talk about the CEO or the brand manager, the marketing director. Not much is different in sports, with the exception that sometimes the players or the employees can be a source of power. Sometimes it can be the head of the organization that can be a source of power. Let's take, for example, the NFL and Roger Goodell. He obviously, through his position as the commissioner of the NFL, has the source power. That means when his statements are aired, that people will listen. ESPN will air his news or his statements, his press conferences, and by and large his rules are pretty much law. So he has the power to create a message for the NFL, for the organization. But one can have power and they can also not be attractive. And by source of attractiveness, we don't mean physical attractiveness, whether or not we think Roger Goodell is a good-looking man, but how are their public opinion, how are they viewed in public opinion? Again, looking at Roger Goodell as an NFL commissioner, he has public polling rather low source attractiveness. A lot of people think he lacks credibility, he lacks composure, he lacks empathy, he lacks understanding, and that he's all around a very ineffective league manager, despite the fact that the NFL is one of the highest profiting sports organizations in America. Counter that with someone like Michael Jordan. Again, financially, he has his own things outside of sports, such as gambling addictions, but he runs and he's the face of one of the largest, most important brands of our time, the Air Jordan. If you live in Chicago, he is an automatic high register of the source attractiveness. He has a steakhouse, he has championships, and when you think of the Chicago Bulls, you think of Michael Jordan. So obviously if a message were going to be developed from him, we'll be more likely to listen because not only does he have some power, but as a fan of Chicago, you're probably going to find him as a more attractive or friendly or trustworthy source. Which takes us to our next one, source credibility. Source credibility is determined by the person's expertise. Are they actually knowledgeable about the sport or the organization? Are they trustworthy? Recently, Brian Williams was asked to step down from the NBC Nightly News because he lost his trustworthiness for lying to the public. Roger Goodell, again, he has high source power, but he lost some trustworthiness with the way he handled with the Ray Rice situation last year, and therefore he probably has very little source credibility due to the trustworthiness. Status. How important are they and how much of an influence do they have? LeBron James has a lot of status within the Cleveland fan base, even though at one point he broke their trust. And then lastly, the profile, who this person is. Let's look at a case study from fantasy sports, for example. If you play NFL fantasy football, you'll know that Matt Berry, who's pictured here, is by many people think that he's a strong source credibility. He tells people who to pick, who to drop. He's made predictions. Sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. I think personally he's often wrong, more times than he's right. Yet, The large NFL player fantasy community finds him is a highly credible source because he has expertise, trustworthiness, and he is sort of the status symbol for fantasy sports. Moving on from our source, taking the next step in the model, we're going to look at our message, and that is, what is it that we're trying to say? As with anything else that you've learned in any public relations or advertising course here at DePaul, there's three things you need to understand. One, your message needs to be relevant. Two, it needs to create a conversation. And three, it must have the brand essence or communicate and support the brand. And with sports, brands are very unique, again, and very fun thing to talk about. Sports also lends itself to much more naturally to be creating a conversation. And when we talk about relevancy, you have to know the exact up-to-date news. News travels fast, and results, trades, injuries, player status, all these things happen so quickly now and are shared so quickly that any message you have has to be breaking news in order for it to be relevant and break through the clutter. Let's talk about relevancy, for example. You'll find that sports organizations, in order to be relevant, have to continually update their message. Take, for example, Ogilvy and the work that they've done to help market the Chicago Blackhawks. Early on, before they started winning their first Stanley Cup, they had to do a way to introduce all these great new young players that they have. This was the year after they got Jonathan Toews and Kane, for example. And on the top left of the screen, you'll see a screenshot there. There was an ad campaign where each of these star players would skate out, say their name, and sort of what their trick or their talent was for the team. This had then transferred over a couple years later. Once people started identifying with this team and wanting to be part of this team and associated with it, they ran the I Am campaign. You'll notice at the top right of the screen, the young man wearing the Keith jersey. And this commercial by Ogilvy showed a series of these commercials of I Am, and it had someone's jersey. The purpose of this was to make it relevant of really identifying that this was a growing fan base, that people were starting to get interest, and the message was really about, hey, look how big we are. We're selling jersey. We have fans. And then lastly, if you go back to the fan identification literature, remember the ladder? Well, this one goal is really where is speaking to the advocate and your raging fans, because it's saying, hey, look, we all have one goal together. You have a goal, we have a goal, and we're going to help win for your goal. And so this was the most recent message this year before the Stanley Cup was one goal, win the Stanley Cup. And they were able to use that as a marketing message for a lot of other events that we'll talk about later this quarter. Again, with sports and sports marketing, part of that message needs to be something that creates a conversation. And the rise of digital, which you'll find in the later modules, has prevented or provided this really nice opportunity. When you create a conversation using digital tools like social media or online experiences, you can do stuff and ask fans to engage with you. Take, for example, the Stanley Cup playoffs, My Playoffs Moment. This was an attempt to get the people to speak to the league about what they were doing in their playoffs, and then for them to market that and share that thing. Also with sports, creating conversation comes very naturally. As you know, people can be very opposed or against one team or really highly identified as a fan of one team. What's nice about sports is, although it's polarizing, it's not as political. Let's take something like gun control, which is very divided in this country. And oftentimes people are either afraid to say their perspective, or sometimes those messages can be very degrading or harmful if not said correctly. However, with sports, it's really hard to, you can say, I don't like the Packers because I'm a Bears fan. You can have this sort of conversation with a Packers fan and Bears fan. Unfortunately, sometimes those do get personal and ugly as well, but anytime you're dealing with sports, there's always opportunities for a conversation to be created. And then lastly, with your message, you need to make sure you're still communicating the brand. Just like in marketing, for any business to consumer product, you have to keep the brand identity relevant throughout its message. Take, for example, Notre Dame. All their marketing materials and all the messages they have will always talk about the prestige and the class and the history of Notre Dame football. You always see that iconic blue and gold image. They want you to remember that even though they haven't had a couple winning seasons, that they are still Notre Dame, and it's based on this history and tradition. Moving on from our message, then we're going to talk about our medium. Obviously, the medium is what we're going to use to talk to our target. As you go and develop campaigns, it's always important to remember where the target's going to be. In order to do this, you need to use data-driven insights. working for an advertising agency, you'll need to understand where these fans are. Are the fans, what are they doing before the game, during the game? And you'll want to use, let's go back and talk about this for a second. When we talk about where are the fans, you also need to talk about the message or the medium, differentiating between people who are watching it at TV and watching people who are at the stadium and watching and tailgating. So figuring out how we're going to not only talk to these fans, but where are we going to be talking to them is very important. In the last lecture, we talked about how fans are using second screen experiences during the game, highlighting that 45% are on some sort of digital platform during a game. Is that an appropriate place to try to reach them for your marketing? Possibly, yes. And I'll talk more about that in one of the later modules about sponsorship. Also, what kind of message or what kind of medium is useful before the game versus after the game. So again, you'll want to understand, going back to what the fan is doing. What is the sociology of this highly identified fan? What type of communication materials are they using? And if you do use an integrated marketing approach, you're going to want to make sure that you have a consistent message. Again, looking at the NHL as an example, you had your always on channel, which was our web. There, it was their job to make sure that the stuff that was being mirrored on their always on channel mirrored what was out in their print and digital channels. So you'll see the My Playoffs moment was sort of stood on its social media platform, and if you scrolled through the actual NHL.com page, you would find a link to the My Playoffs moment. Obviously, in the print publications that they're putting out, in order to be relevant, they kept the Stanley Cup playoffs up to date, and you could find more information on their Always On channel. So really understand how you're using these different mediums. The print one was more informative. The digital was an opportunity to engage you and activate a fan base. And then lastly, the receiver. The receiver, there's two ways we can think about it. As you'll read in Chapter 2 of the Module 2's readings, there's the behavior school and the cognitive school. One, the behavior school kind of says that there's this black box that we don't really, the brain, we don't know how it functions, that people have an attitude and they buy. It looks more on automated responses, whereas the cognitive school says, hey, let's look inside the black box, which is, i.e. our brain, and see if we can figure out some sort of these processes and some sort of a psychological approach that would influence someone to shop. I'm not going to get too much into that. There's a lot of great reading in there. Make sure you read that for the quiz. And that there's so much depth in that I think we can make a whole nother course on that. But I wanted you to at least be aware of those two concepts. What I really want you to get out of this idea of the receiver, though, is understand the role of fan identification. Look at how our different fan bases activate and work. Here's a meme, and I don't know how accurate the Miami Heat parade, or how accurate this is. It may just be kind of a joke, but I thought it was a great example of an illustration of looking at how you could have two different acting fan bases. Miami Heat, maybe they weren't that excited that they won another trophy, or maybe it's they're just not engaged and excited about the NBA. Who knows? But when you looked at this last week's the Chicago Blackhawks parade, tons of people rallied for a sport in the NHL, which is actually lower ranking than NFL or NBA. Yet tons of people showed up. That means people, once again, were burgeoning. They wanted to be part of that conversation. They may not be able to name 2 or 3 players on that team. However, they want to say, we won, our city won, and I was there for it. As someone in sports marketing, you will need to consider the audience behavior. So look at our highly identified fans, look at the ladder and understand where are these people that we're talking to on the ladder. Are they raging fans? Are they advocates? Or on the bottom half? Are they possibly clients or potential someone who's just potentially interested in the sport? You also have to understand that the receiver or the fans will adapt over time. Not only will their demographics change, but also their feelings towards the team and towards the league. And then also you will want to use the same consistent voice, especially when it comes to sports, because bonds are built and last over decades. We're not talking about a beer or a tennis shoe here that, for a couple of years it may be really a great shoe, maybe dominating the market, and then the next big thing comes around. Sports, again, offer this really emotional attachment. And if you're a fan at the age of 8 or 9, you want to keep that same message, and you want to make sure that you're communicating who you are as a brand and who you are as a team relevant. As this way, as when that fan is a 30-year-old, it's still that nostalgic connection between 8-year-old memories and 30-year-old memories. So here's our source, message, medium, receiver. Again, you'll notice that it's not much different than any basic marketing funnel. However, there are some things that make it unique to sports that you'll want to identify and be aware of. And I do want to end with remembering the brand. Again, talking about sports as a brand. Fans present a very unique environment, and those brand associations are very important. As such, four positive outcomes are derived from a strong brand association. Fans, unlike using a different basic business consumer product, there's often positive memories. Your brand needs to differentiate itself from the other products on the field. You have to understand that fans have a different motivation for consuming, whether it's for family and social events or because they're a raging fan. And ultimately, you want, no, even if it's a losing team, to associate good feelings with your brand. So, differentiation, soccer, for example, not really big in the United States, but there was something different about what the World Cup did. They did a good job of really making it about an event. It was a once in a lifetime event to come watch Team USA, to dress up and to party, and as a result, you had a lot of people who normally would never watch soccer really tuning in to watch the World Cup. Over 18.2 billion people or million people, watched the USA versus Portugal game on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. Um, Also, I want you to identify the 8 attributes for sports. Again, these are things that make sports as a brand a little bit different than your basic consumer marketing. Number one, identify opportunities for success. People, as you learned in Module 1, love to affiliate with winning teams. So obviously for the Blackhawks right now, it's going to be a big success and easy to talk about we have the cup. But what if you were the Chicago Bulls? Well, how do we frame that message of success? Well, we made it to the playoffs, or hey, we fired our coach and we're going to be getting a new coach and we're going to be looking for new successes, or maybe we have a great draft pick coming in. So it's all how you identify those successes, and fans will attach themselves and you give them something to look forward to. Like I said, obviously the Blackhawks, great success. Also, unlike other marketing brands or non-sports brands, sports provide an opportunity to talk about star players, franchise players. However, this should be taken into some risk. Manning, he was easily the face of the Indianapolis Colts while he was the quarterback. Great, clear. Peyton was a clear-cut, winning quarterback. Everyone loved him. He's on Saturday Night Live. He's doing all these commercials. Great to build a brand around him. People identified with him as part of the team. However, there is risk because what if he leaves, what he did, or what if he gets injured, what he did. Your head coach. I love sports because only sports is people will really talk about. Who's the coach? Not many CEOs of a company get this kind of attention. Who's the CEO of Adidas? Who's the CEO of Pepsi Cola? Who's the CEO of Coca-Cola? We sort of know who the CEO of Apple was, Steve Jobs, because he really made himself identifiable. But most places don't really know the CEOs or managers. However, the head coach, most people who are in tune with sports know who this is. Sometimes it can change and unite an entire fan base. When Nick Saban was hired by Mal Moore, the town went ecstatic. They threw him a parade before he even got there and won anything because they knew he was going to be able to win some championships for the University of Alabama, and he is the face of Alabama football right now. If Nick Saban were to leave, it's more likely than not that Alabama won't be the team that it is, making it to the playoffs or doing really well in the postseason. Take another example. If you're a fan of the Big Ten football, here you have Jim Harbaugh. How much attention did he get as a coach when he took the job at Michigan? Ladies and gentlemen, his position at Michigan is a game changer for Big Ten and all of college football. Now the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is going to be relevant once again. He's already made moves in making the Big Ten more competitive than the SEC in terms of recruiting battles. So a head coach has the opportunity to be something that a lot of sports people want to talk about. And like I said, counter this, very few CEOs or managers get the type of attention, with the exception of being someone like Steve Jobs. The stadium, or where the business takes place, is also a really big deal. There's a couple prime examples that you can use in marketing messages to talk about the stadium. First thing that comes to mind, Wrigleyville. Many people come to Chicago and come to a Cubs game just so that they can watch and see Wrigley Field. My father-in-law doesn't care about baseball, doesn't care about Chicago Cubs, but when he came to visit, the number one thing on his list was go see a game at Wrigley Field. Obviously, what they've done in terms of the modifications and the renovations was open to a lot of debate. Some people thought it was great that they were renovating it. Some people were really upset that they're taking away um, the historic views away from the park. Um, Most office buildings aren't going to have that type of attention that a sports stadium will get. On the other side, oh, there's the updated Wrigley Field. I haven't been there yet, but that looks like a really nice scoreboard. Other attention, Levi's Field. When the San Francisco 49ers moved into this new stadium, this generated a lot of attention, mostly because of how digital and integrated it was. You could use your smartphone at your seat, and someone would come deliver food to you. So the days of the guy running up and down going popcorn, peanuts, beer were gone. Now it's you place an order and someone runs it. So it's very integrated in terms of the digital capacity and innovations that they had available. This got a lot of attention. Product delivery. This is very similar to consumer brands. Your team, in order to talk about its success or star players, needs to win on the field. Again, looking at Jonathan Tays, look at how young he was. That was his rookie year. He's a star player. He's had a lot of success in the league. He's brought a lot of success to the Chicago Blackhawks. It makes it a very nice, easy thing to talk about performance on the field. If your team doesn't lose or doesn't win, i.e. the Chicago Cubs, you need to find something else what the product delivers. Wrigley Field, for the longest time, the product they delivered was a good family fun event. People didn't care if they won or lost. It was, hey, we have cheap tickets, cold beer, really great hot dogs, come and have a good time. And that's what the brand promised to deliver. Hopefully, even if they become a winning team, that they still honor that promise and give you that product. Otherwise, it's going to upset a lot of people. Unlike marketing, you need to have a very strong logo presence or visual presence for fans. It makes it easy when you're trying to sell other merchandising. It's hard to think of Alabama without the houndstooth, all because of one historic coach, Bear Bryant, wore this pattern on a hat and a jacket. It sort of became synonymous with Alabama. So anytime you see houndstooth, it's likely it's more often than not going to be someone who's related to Alabama in terms of their fan or alumni relations. And then lastly, what we love about talking about sports is tradition. What's the brand story, whether it's in their history, whether it's winning or losing? The Cubs have a losing history. They've never won a title, but that's what we talk about. Alabama, on the other hand, has a tradition of winning, having won more SEC titles than any other school in that conference. They have a tradition of winning and being tough and physical. And so how we talk about what those teams bring and what they embody is really good for crafting your message. Like I said, here's our sad Cubs fan. They have the history of losing. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if they win this year or next year, how that conversation now has changed. Lastly, management. I kind of put this in the category of the head coach. It's important to talk about how managers add to the brand, what they do. Sometimes you can have a manager. Here's Al Davis. He was an owner. He got a lot of attention for the Raiders, probably for making bad moves and owning the team much longer than he should have. But he was to the Oakland Raiders, where, and this is what they thought of when you thought of Oakland Raiders and management. This is the guy you saw. Sometimes, though, the managers and CEOs can be a very negative thing for the brand or the organization. Take, for example, Donald Sterling and all the remarks that happened surrounding the Clippers. Again, sports, you see a lot of if management makes a great decision or really good trades and drafts, are held as a hero for the team, or if they make bad decisions or make bad comments, then they can receive a lot of criticism and hurt the organization. So in conclusion, the communication model for sports promotion is very similar to any basic communication model. You have your source, your message, your channel, and the receiver. However, sports has some key fundamental differences, but what's nice about these is through, especially in the message, there's a lot of way you can integrate these communication tactics. I offered you 8 different tactics that are useful for sports to integrate into the conversation, and it's important to understand how brand identity with sports or with the franchise team functions in there. It is a very emotional attachment, especially when you're talking to the highly identified fans. So I hope that as you look at Module 2, you use this to build off of what we learned in Module 1 about the audience that we're talking to. If you have any questions, please post them to the virtual question board, and I look forward to seeing you in class.